We're going to get into more detail about that, quotes, practice exam a little later in our webinar. The exam is scored by the Ccap Commission about 1 week after it is administered. It's based on the 5 sections of the body of knowledge. You'll see that on the very next page of our webinar. On the next slide, these are the next slide, you'll see what you were used to seeing. The questions, objective questions, are based on history, vision and values, traditional management functions, leadership skills, and theories of poverty. In addition, Section 2 of the exam, Section 1 is all objective questions. Section 2 is the essay questions. There are 4 of them, and that includes the New Hope case study questions. A copy of the New Hope case study currently in use for the exam will be sent to candidates who have qualified to take the exam in this particular year. Next slide, please. And the exam has a passing score of 700 out of a possible 1,000 points. Next slide, please. Now, this is presuming what you're going to be seeing about the 2021 exam presumes that the Commission will formally decide on continuing the virtual format that was designed for last year. It's most likely that will happen, but the Commission has to formally make the decision that that is the case. And that will happen within a few days. If that is the case, and it probably will be, a set of virtual sites will act as lobbies into the virtual exam room. Those virtual meeting sites are either Zoom-based or GoToMeeting-based, and each candidate has the option to choose one or the other format. Zoom, which we find is more frequent for the 501c3 nonprofits, and GoToMeeting, which tends to be more frequently used in public caps, tends to be. Now, each candidate will have the opportunity to register for one of these virtual sites between May 15th and June 1st. It will take us until about that time to make sure that we have all of the proctors who are hosts on those sites lined up and adequately trained to take on the process. And each of those sites will meet at either 9, 10, or 11 a.m. And you will get to choose which time frame and which platform to enter the exam from. There'll be much more about that later in our set of slides. When candidates log on to a site, the host proctor will ask each candidate one by one to do some things to show on camera, and this is going to populate over 2 slides. That there's no one else in the room, that there's nothing on the candidate's desk other than the following items listed on the next slide, namely, coming up, there we go, the computer, a handheld calculator, a blank notepad, pens and pencils, a copy of the exam regulations, an unmarked copy of the new health case description, and a bottle of water, whatever you need to keep hydrated. You're hearing me pause every now and then because I have asthma and I have to keep hydrating. The candidate's cell phone must be turned off and placed out of convenient reach from the candidate's seat and within computer range. These things that are describing here as expectations for the exam, we'll call them the exam regulations, are codified and will be sent to all of you who qualify in advance of the exam. So that will be repeated in written form as well as what we're saying here today, and with more guidance and specific details, more minute details. Let's go to the next slide then, please. Okay. Now, in preparation for the exam, a study guide is developed every year. And that guide contains the sources used for all the questions on the examination. And it's set up to correlate to the body of knowledge outline. And the guide is posted on the partnership website. It's been posted since late January this year. So if you haven't been there yet, go already and pull it up. Some of you are in study groups and have probably already begun doing that. Even if you don't qualify for the exam this year, it's valuable to look to those sources and to study that, because there's enough that's the same year to year from the exam that preparation for one year will help for the next year. The exam is not the same year to year, but the same resources are used frequently, very frequently. Now, certain documents referenced in the study guide are included as attachment. I believe there's about 24, 25 attachments this year. That includes certain federal documents and certain publications by the partnership and by Ccap and others, and by a variety of organizations that support our work of community action partner agencies and organizations that work to advance economic opportunity, as well as some federal programs, et cetera. Now, if they are not attached and are referenced in the study guide, that is usually because there's a copyright concern for doing that. So if you request, well, can I get a copy of? The answer is usually no. Something that's on the list of resources for the study guide, but not in your attachments. There are specific reasons why they can't be attachments. But for the most part, most of those resources are included. Now, I want to emphasize that the study guide contains the sources narrowed down to the chapter that the questions from in that section of the body of knowledge are written from. That very chapter is where the answer to that question will be found. We're not going to give you the question. We'll give you the chapter to study for, to prepare for that question. But the question may not be a memorization, memorize the 5 things in that chapter. It may require thought based on that chapter and application. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about the certification examination. First, we're going to learn the online exam login and navigation process for the practice exam, then this thing of accessing this virtual lobby, and then the Ccap examination. But before doing that, I'm going to look over to the chat window. I don't see any questions in the chat window. Did I miss any, Javita or Mitzi?
None so far.
Okay. Okay, we'll check in again after a few more slides. So now we're going to take a look at learning, say, the login and navigation process. We're going to look at that for the practice exam. And getting ready for the online exam, here's what's involved. Next, you access the website. You can see there the highlighted blue link. That link will be sent to you. You enter your ID and password. The ID and password assigned to you will be given to you along with your notice of qualifying to take the exam. And actually, it's your 5-digit candidate code. That's intentional because that's a unique identifier. Because when the commission looks at the exam, they do not ever see a name. They only see candidate numbers. That's all they see. So that makes it as anonymous as possible. Now, that's the ID and password that will be assigned to you once you qualify, unless you have already, for another program through the Community Action Academy, already have set up an account. In that case, your account that you've already set up will be your ID and password. It's just that you will be also listed as registered for Ccap activities specifically. I will be taking care of that in kind of the back room of the Moodle site. Now you will see this message at the bottom of the page. Is this your first time here? It says, please create an account to get started. Don't do that. Don't create an account. One has been set up for you, unless you created an account, as I mentioned a few moments ago, before for any other Community Action Academy activity. But if you're signing on for the first time for Ccap, the account will be created for you. If you sign up for one, it makes it a little more complicated. I can fix that, but let's make it easier for everybody. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is what you will see as you sign in. If you take a look, and let's populate that. The 5-digit code is signed to you. The 5-digit ID is also your password. If you correctly enter the information, you see there the arrow pointing to the left of your picture, if most people don't add one. That's where your name will appear. So right there on the top in the red line, you should see your name, Jane Smith. If a name appears, log out immediately, because if you stay on, you'll actually be taking the exam for that person. So use the drop down to the right of the picture to re-enter the correct information. You'll see that on the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. The drop-down menu appears when you click on the downward arrow next to the picture placeholder, and you click on Log Out. Remember that because you need to log out every time you finish a session. Your log on times and log out times leave a record, and I'm able to access that. And that can complicate things at exam time. So make sure, please, that you log out when you're finished. Okay, let's go to the next slide. That's for both the practice exam and the actual exam. Now, having determined that you've entered to the correct page, open the practice exam by clicking on this link. See down underneath Ccap practice exam. So you'll see two, at least. It depends on whether you have other activities going on. But you'll see Ccap practice exam and Ccap examination. If you attempt to click on Ccap examination, it won't let you anyway, because it will not open until exam day. But you click on Ccap practice exam, and you can do that as often as you wish between April 15th. That's for sure that by then we'll know who all the qualifying candidates are. That's a rather conservative, last-minute things not going well estimate. And June 11th. After that, we do have too much other work than to follow that. That'll be clear in a few minutes to see why that's the case. So open the Ccap practice exam, and this is what you'll see. Next slide. That's what it looks like. A description page will appear, which contains the link to open the practice exam. Ccap practice exam for candidates taking June 2021 exam. Actually, if you follow there, it actually says taking July 2020 exam. Not to worry about that. I used last year's slide because there's not going to be any difference in look, but it'll be exactly there, but it will say June 2021 exam. So when you click on that, when you open this page, you'll see this button to begin the test. Now notice it says attempt quiz now. Moodle considers all exams, quizzes. That's just with the name they use for them. So when you click on Attempt Quiz Now on that page, it's on that same page that this is a partial picture of. Here's what you will see on the next slide. There are two ways to navigate those pages. Each question is a page. You can click on the next page or previous page button, or you can click on the page number outlined in the panel list. Now, in this particular edition of the Moodle program, those boxes with the page numbers appear at the bottom. Sometimes they appear on the right-hand column, but it will be clear. Your two options. As you navigate through the exam, click on Next Page or Previous Page, or click on Page Number. If you look towards the top of the page, you'll see that this box on the top shows you the value of the question. Each of the objective questions, actually, is valued at 20 points. Each of the essay questions is valued at 50 points. And it also gives you the option to flag the question instead of answering it. That means if you click on Flag Question, it will alert you, and you'll see where later, that you need to go back to that question and respond to it. And this is what the questions look like. Simple. So, which American president signed the Economic Opportunity Act? That should be pretty obvious, shouldn't it? Okay. All right. Let's go on to the next page, which is a sample of what the essay question looks like. And that's our next slide. The blue section is the actual question. And this is the question that's in the practice exam. All right? Well, not noticed, I think we've used a different one from this one. But notice the space limit. No more than 40 lines are available in where you type your answer, which is the white box below this. That 40 lines has never, in the 3 years we've been using the Moodle exam platform, has never been a problem. Not to be concerned. That's plenty of room to answer these questions. If you think you need to use more than 40 lines, that might be a snow attempt. All right. It's important to be succinct and accurate. Now, the white space underneath does function much like an MS Word document, and it includes the editing options in the bar just above. Now, you can practice certain additional formatting options by clicking that downward arrow that appears on the left of the taskbar. That includes such features as adding a table, but be advised it requires more formatting skill than Microsoft Word does. Now, if you want to use that, just make sure that you become very, very comfortable with using it and its functionality well before exam day. And it is not necessary to use these more advanced features, and it will not affect your score either way, whether you use them or not. I repeat, it will not affect your score either way, whether you use those more advanced features or not. The commission will be looking for accuracy and relevance in your response, not formatting. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. So this is this is what you see in the practice exam, which actually has 10 questions to it. On the last page of the exam, you click on the Finish attempt box. It'll look just like that. Finish attempt. And when you click on finish attempt, the next slide shows you what you will see. All right? You will see a summary of your attempt, noting which questions you have answered. It says answer saved on the list. You know that you've answered it, which are only partially answered. You see, incomplete answer, which are not yet answered, including those you flagged to return to. So if you look to the far left, you see the little flag next to question number 5. That's your reminder to go back to that question. Or if you look at the boxes that show the page numbers of the questions, you'll see that number 3 shows incomplete answer. There's a little caution triangle at the bottom. Questions 5 and 7 have been flagged. There's a flag at the top right-hand corner. So it's all meant to help you be aware during the exam of what you've done and not done yet. Okay? And then, let's go to the next page, the next slide I mean. If you click on Finish Attempt, you'll see the option to return to attempt. You say, oh, I have to go back and answer those ones I forgot about. Okay. You see the button you click on, return to attempt. You can go all the way back to it. Or to submit all and finished. Okay. It also tells you how much time you have left to complete the exam. You will see during the course of the whole exam a little timer clicking down how many minutes are left. That is used in the practice exam with a very long time that you won't need. That little clock or timer that shows the time that's left is only to give you the experience of working with that visible to you. Some people find that helpful, other people find that nerve-wracking. All right. You must submit, click on Submit All and Finish, or your answers will not be posted to the server and all will be voided. So when you get to this point, finish attempt, and you make your decisions about whether to return to attempt or submit all or finished, you have to click Submit All or Finished for the server to save your answers. However, there is one exception. If the exam, and this is especially true of the actual exam, the practice exam, nobody stays on it that long. If the exam times out before you're finished, in that case, it is programmed to save your responses. Okay? That's happened to a candidate a couple of times last year and got quite anxious in the room saying, I kicked me out. You know, your answers were saved as far as you got. But if you finish before time is up, you must click on Submit All and Finish. You can't just leave it. Okay? But it helps you think about that because when you click on Submit All and Finish, here's what happens. Next slide. You will be asked to confirm that decision the second time. And it tells you, once you submit, you will no longer be able to change your answer for this attempt. Okay? Now, a review of your answers will appear, but you won't be able to change them. To end, I know for certain that that function has been enabled to review for the practice exam. I'm not sure that that function has been enabled for the actual Ccap exam. And I think there's reasons as exam security, that's why it's the case. So that no one's taking pictures or anything of that of the exam. But this function, yes, it does say this function will be disabled on the Ccap exam, however. That is to say, the review function. But it gives you that, oops, I didn't mean to do that, opportunity to cancel, as you can see in that box. Then you log out from the drop-down menu as we showed before. Okay? Now we're going to get in some practical guidance. Let's go to the next slide, please. The differences between the practice exam and the June 16th Ccap exam. First, you can return to that practice exam. And in fact, it's a good idea to return as often as you want. You can log on to the Ccap exam only once. If you log out, you're stuck. If you log out, if there is a power failure, if the logging out, if the discontinuing of the exam is the fault upstream from you at Moodle or something, it does save it, and you will not lose that. You won't lose your time. But if you log out, that's it. The Ccap exam actually is 2 quizzes. As I mentioned before, the one is a set of 40 objective questions covering all areas of the body of knowledge outline. The second is a set of essay questions, including the question on New Hope. Okay? Each of the 2 tests that make up the whole Ccap exam opens for sign-in only on the date of the exam. Sometimes it takes a little longer for the page to open than was the case with the practice exam. You must open the objective question section first. And you may take a short break before you access the essay questions. That's the second session. But you need to communicate that to your host proctor. We'll get to that in a few minutes, about how you work with your proctor. Each session of the exam is timed. There's a small timer on the page. If the time runs out, completed questions will be auto-uploaded. To repeat that, but you won't be able to change anything. You still must log off. Before we proceed to further specific instructions about the virtual examiners, I'm going to look over to the chat box and see what questions we have.
And Jim, we actually
One
do
of
have
our-
one question. Oh, great. You see it as well.
I see it. Does the practice exam take 4 hours to complete also? No. Practice exam takes as much or as little time as you want. It's 10 questions, and there's an 11th page in which you are asked to type into that white box any difficulties you had accessing, logging in, or navigating it, or any questions you have about the exam process that may have been complicated or problematic. I will be checking in with the practice exam regularly after April 15th. And if I see something in that box for that quotes question number 11 that requires some guidance, I will respond to what's in that box. But that's your way to get questions and concerns to me as the exam consultant. Okay, so some people might take an hour to do because they're really fiddling with like formatting and things like that. It's up to you. As much time as you want to do it or not. The point of that practice exam is not the content of the questions. These are not going to appear in the exam, those questions. The purpose of the practice exam is to get used to the website and the process of using that page. And so the more familiar you get with it, the more at ease you become with it, the better. So then, During the practice exam and the actual exam, we need to log out each time. Yes, we leave the exam. I take this to mean we can take needed brief breaks during the exam, not during the actual Ccap exam. It's like any other exam. When you go to sit there for that 2 hours for the one section and 2 hours around that for the other one, you stay there. If there's a reason to leave the room, that has to be communicated to the proctor, and that is recorded by the proctor, that candidate needed to leave the room. Okay. If you skip or forget a question, I assume you just missed points for that question. Well, you're not going to forget a question because the program's going to tell you to go back to it. The only reason you wouldn't get the credit for that is that you just didn't want to answer it. And yes, you will lose those 20 points. Next one, understanding the Ccap Commission needs to make final determination on the 2021 process. Do we anticipate that the exam will be taken in home or office? That is the most likely. Whatever, we genuinely prefer that you do it in the actual, your practice exam. It's best to do it in the setting that you're going to take the actual exam. We suggest that you take the actual exam where you have the most robust internet connection. Usually that's going to be more in your office, unless you have a really well-connected fiber optic home setting, etc. But the other problem is in home settings is interruptions, etc. And so I strongly suggest you make arrangements at your agency for an office for your use, just for that purpose. Someone said, I noticed that on the essay sample, it said there were 2 questions, but below listed 2 tasks. That needs to be edited. Thank you, Madison. Yes, that's just for practice anyway. We're not concerned on content here. Will there be sample essay questions on the practice exam? Well, that is one. Yes, there will be one sample essay question. I believe it's one about a grant that your agency has received, if I'm not mistaken, and how you're going, and you get less money than you asked for, and then how you're going to make adjustments to your grant based on that lesser amount that's awarded to you, if I remember correctly. Will there be Yes, okay, we got to that one. On the practice exam, do the questions take you time? No, the questions remain the same. That's because we're not interested in content. We're only interested in process. Will everyone be notified the same day if they're eligible? Yes. Everyone will be notified basically the same time. That might be a day or 2, depending on the message system, but the answer is at the same time. After moving on to quiz 2 essays and completing, can you go back? No, you can't. Each quotes quiz is accessible for security reasons only once. So that once it only allows one attempt. So once you close that attempt, you can't return to it. Once you close the objective questions, you can't return to that. Once you close the essays, you can't return to that. Good questions. Thank you, everyone. Okay, let's move on to our next page. Our next slide, I mean. Okay. Now, the landing page you will see when the day of the test. It said the link is not active. That's what you'll see. And what you will click on is access Ccap examination. Okay. Let's continue. When you open that page, you will see the 2 different exams or quizzes. Actually, if you were going to be technical about this from Moodle's perspective, this is 2 quizzes. The exam is 2 separate ones. First, you click on the Ccap objective questions, and then click on the essay questions when that second session begins. I notice it says 2020, but it's the same format for 2021. Okay? Let's go to our next page. Now, some preps, do's, and don'ts. Go to practice at least once between April 15th and June 11th. Again, as I mentioned, the last quotes question asks you to note difficulties. And I will contact you with a response if that is needed. Suggest that you go there as early as you can. Now, it is possible that that practice exam may open up a little earlier than April 15th, but definitely by April 15th. But it has to close on June 11th because it's just 5 days left to turn some things around. It's like resetting the table for dinner, okay? So there are things that have to happen, so it has to close on June 11th. Register for your virtual site. That's the exam lobby. After you receive a list of options in mid-May from me, the exam consultant. Now, why that date? Well, we'll know in April how many host proctors we need for how many virtual lobbies for persons to enter the Moodle site from. And exam host proctors, some have already trained in doing that, others might need to be. So it'll take that amount of time to align things up so that we have what I'm going to list for you now, so that we have host proctor contact information that will be contained in that message that will identify the platform, the meeting platform, the lobby that each will use. But before registering for the exam, carefully read the exam regs, which also will have been sent to you in advance, soon after you have qualified to take the exam. And those are the exam regulations about the process of doing the exam. And it's going to be similar to what you've heard here, but with a little bit more detail. You must sign your agreement to follow those regulations and scan the signature page and submit with your registration, which is on the next slide. This comes with your email message that tells you about your options for host proctor, time, 9, 10, or 11 Eastern Daylight Time, subtract time zones for yourself as needed, and your option for which platform or virtual lobby to use from which you enter Moodle. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a moment. And the signature page says that you agree to those, follow the regulations. Now, notice your deadline there are 2 different deadlines here. You have a longer window to go to the practice exam. You have a shorter one for choosing your virtual site. And that's from May 15th to June 11th. That's the time in which that decision needs to be made, okay? It's also a time for you to familiarize yourself with the New Hope case study, and then to contact the host at your chosen virtual lobby to arrange for a practice session using that virtual site meeting program, using that, whether it's GoToMeeting or Zoom. Let's go to the next slide. Continue. Before the exam, more about one-on-one virtual site practice session with your house proctor. Schedule at least one practice session with your host proctor between 4:15 and 6:11. Well, actually, it should be saying 5:15, I'm sorry, and 6:11. After you receive an invitation to do so from the host proctor, then log on to the virtual site, the lobby, using the same computer that you will be using on exam day. Use the same internet connection and the same internet service provider you'll be using on exam day. I'm saying all these things in order to lessen the possibility of glitches. Do this practice session of accessing the lobby from the office or room in your home or agency you will be using on exam day, the one that you know has the most reliable internet connection with no distractions or interruptions. Now, it might be helpful to be in contact with a host proctor via cell phone at the same time as you rehearse the process online. For some of you, all of this is just second nature stuff. But for some people, these extra assistance suggestions are necessary to feel comfortable doing the exam. So simulate the exam experience then with your host proctor using the either GoToMeeting or Zoom by opening up a second window on the same browser that you've been on to access the Ccap practice exam on Moodle with your host proctor there with you, because that's exactly what the experience will be like on exam day. It's so important to do that, unless you're very computer savvy and used to it, and many of you might well be. Here's the reason I'm saying that. Any issues you may have with the connection are to be resolved before exam day. There is no option to appeal exam scores for candidates whose connection to the Moodle site fails, unless it's a problem with the Moodle server. Failure to maintain connection to virtual sites is addressed in the regs in more detail. Okay? Let's move on. Next slide. On the day of the exam, log on to your virtual site at the appointed time, either 9, 10, or 11 Eastern Daylight Time, or different for your, translate that for the Central Time or West Coast Time, Pacific. And host proctors have been informed they may wait no longer than 15 minutes for all to log on and must begin the session. You must use your certified laptop. As I say, you must use the laptop you used to log on to the practice exam. You must be alone in the exam room, no one else with you, no interruptions, anyone coming into the room. Your cell phone must be turned off, out of easy reach from your computer, and visible to your computer camera. If you need to communicate with anyone, it's really the host proctor, and you do that through private chat. There must be nothing on your desk besides a handheld calculator. I do strongly suggest you bring one, because there's always some kind of question on the exam that involves some kind of exploration and consideration of budget concerns. A copy of the exam regulations, which will be sent to you, an unmarked copy of the News Hope case description, which will be sent to you, paper, blank notepad, pens and pencils, suggest a bottle of water for hydration, Now, some persons might have special dietary needs. We have had the request before from someone who is diabetic and specific in her treatment plan needed to be able to have something to snack during the time. Well, that's an accommodation. And of course, accommodations will be granted as required, but it's not expected to be the standard practice. Okay, next slide, please. Let's continue that. You may use a notepad to assist you in calculating or in formulating your response to any question before entering your response to the computer. Again, for purposes of exam security, at the end of the exam, you must completely tear up all your notes and discard those destroyed pages in the view of your camera, that the proctor can see you have done that. Other concerns, see the exam regulations for more details. And again, if you do need accommodations per ADA, please notify me and we will find our best way to make accommodations. Okay, last slide, and then I'll check to see if there, next slide, check to see if there are any messages in the chat window, and I don't really, I think we've covered them all, yes. Yes, we've covered them all. There's no more in there. Now, questions about the exam should come to me at ccapcontact@aol.com. All other questions related to CCAP should go to the program administrator, Mitzi Hubbard, at mhubbard@communityactionpartnership.com. If you have other CCAP-related questions coming, I'll just forward them to her anyway. And again, that's the logon address for the Moodle program, moodle.communityactionpartnership.com. No W, no triple W, okay? But that URL will be sent to you again. Okay, no, some questions have appeared. Okay. Are there any recommendations? Oh, let's go up even further. There's some up before that. What about people in this group who may need an accommodation for conditions such as AD, ADHD, ASD, etc.? Funny you should ask me as a mental health practitioner. I know how to address those issues if that is the case. That's my field. I'm a licensed psychotherapist. So we can address those if need be, and we'll find our way to do that. Is there a consideration if electric connections are interrupted due to a power outage in local communities? Yes, there are. There are ways that can be handled through the back end of this, and the proctors and I will have the ability to take care of that if that happens. And I would be alerted immediately by the proctor that has happened, and there is a way to do that, okay? Are there any recommendations on specific web browsers? It's the one you're most comfortable with, I would say. The Moodle program works fine in all of the major web browsers. It would be great to remind candidates if they would like to get connected with a Ccap study group to help them prepare for the exam, that you'll get them in touch with Charles McCann and Tiffany Conley. Yeah, well, actually, that's if you've not been involved in a study group, you want to connect with Mitzi about that. If you're not involved in a study group, there are options, I'm sure, for study groups, there always have been, that admit people from outside just that state. But I don't know exactly what those are. But Mitzi, in connecting with Charles McCann, who is the Ccap commissioner who runs most of those study groups, may be able to make that connection for you. My next question, I may have missed it. When do we find out if we passed the exam and we will be given our score? You'll find out if you pass the exam somewhere towards about the end of March, the beginning of April. That's because of the long process it takes, not just for the panels to come to an agreement on scores on the executive skills portfolio, but also to do certain kinds of audits that have to follow up on certain technical situations. So it does take until the end of March, maybe the first week of April. And we try to get, and it's been the practice of the commission to provide those responses to everyone at the same time. If you didn't get the score to qualify for the exam, you will get what the score was for the CDF and the executive skills portfolio. And that gives also some suggestions that leads to the possible suggestions of areas of focus. Now, those areas of focus cannot be content specific because the program administrator and the Ccap exam consultant are not permitted to talk about content of Ccap, only about the process. But statistics help. Is there no option to take a bathroom break during? Well, no, it's not a 4-hour exam. The exam is in two 2-hour segments, around 2 hours, and there's the break in between. If someone does have, I can't, I have a special need, then just inform the proctor so that the proctor knows that that's what's happening. Okay, I think we got them all. So, again, your questions about the exam are welcome at ccapcontact@aol.com. And I wish you good luck. All of those, first of all, that do find that you will qualify for the exam. And a reminder that you will be able to access this webinar, again, as you wish, probably within about a week when it's able to be posted as an archived webinar. So thanks everyone for your generous attention during this long presentation. Did you have, Madison, anything to close off? I'm saying goodbye. I pass it on to you.
No, looks like we got all the questions. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Stay safe out there.